As gardeners, we're always trying to get an edge and improve our gardens. One way of doing that is if we can improve our soils. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in this video. In our last video, we talked a little bit about soil, how the soil comes about, what it's made of, how it's structured, the nutrients, the chemicals, the biologicals that are in soil. Today, we're going to try to talk a little bit about how to improve your soils. First, let's talk about amendments. Amendments are things that you add and mix into your soil to change the structure of your soil, or the availability of nutrients or water. For example, peat moss or vermiculite, which would help your soil hold water, or perlite, which will help your soil drain better. These are examples of amendments. Compost would also be a good amendment. Let's talk a little bit about compost. Compost is great stuff. Compost is sort of the universal amendment that also actually releases nutrients as it breaks down. Compost consists of basically rotting organic matter, which can be derived from your yard, kitchen clippings. You can go out and purchase it. Places like our local university, which is Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. You can buy it there in large quantities. You can get it in nurseries, hardware stores. You can brew it into compost tea and use it as essentially a fertilizer. But compost is actually added to your soil, is probably the best single amendment that you can put in your soil. And if you keep putting it in your soil and keep putting it in your soil will improve. It may take time and you may need some patience, but compost is like magic. Examples of other amendments. Gypsum, for example, which is actually kind of a mineral that you can mix into your soil, and it will alter the structure of the soil. Particularly around here, many of our soils are rather what's called sodic. They're arid soils. They may have a lot of salt in them, and something like gypsum may improve those soils. Sulfur compounds, garden sulfur, which can increase the acidity of soils. Earthworm castings. Sand. Some people think that sand is an amendment to soil, and it could be. But again, it's something that you have to research a little bit and be careful about. If you put too much sand into a clay soil thinking you're going to improve that clay soil, what you're actually going to get is cement. Cover crops can also be considered a form of soil amendment. A cover crop there are certain plants that you can grow, till them under. They will improve the nutrients in the soil and improve the structure of the soil. Fertilizers, another thing you can do to improve your soil. Now, many of the soils around here really don't need a lot of fertilizer, and sometimes you fertilize. For example, if you're doing a commercial orchard, you will do certain types of fertilization at different times of the year in order to improve your crops, both the quantity and the quality of your crops. But if you've tested your soil and you know that you're deficient in certain nutrients, you can get fertilizers. And if you look at the fertilizer, the typical fertilizer bag will have NPK on it: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. So if you want to improve the nitrogen in your soil, you can look for something like ammonium sulfate, which is pretty much a pure nitrogen yielding product. Now, if your soil, for example, is iron deficient, you can get chelated iron. In fact, depending on what your soil needs, you can get all kinds of combinations of fertilizers that will hopefully fix it. What you put into your soil as far as fertilizer and nutrients really is somewhat dependent on what the soil needs. And there really is no point in simply throwing excess amounts of fertilizer, which will actually just waste your time and money and probably won't help your plants. So one thing that's important to remember, though, for us here who live in Arroyo Grande or San Luis Obispo County or wherever you live, that sometimes even more important than amendments or fertilizer is remembering that we want the right plant in the right place at the right time. And that may be even more important than, say, throwing too much fertilizer on your soil. Now let's talk about mulch. First of all, what is mulch? Mulch is something that you put on top of the soil in order to help mitigate weed growth, control temperature, control moisture. We normally think of, and we've probably all seen mulch, things like gorilla hair or bark put on a flower bed, but you also can use other things as mulch. Clean cardboard makes a great mulch. Sometimes you see plastic wrap put down, particularly on the strawberry fields. That's actually a form of mulch. Okay, let's talk for a minute about solarization to improve your soil. Solarization is a concept that's been developed where you lay out plastic sheeting over an area of your soil. Generally, you prepare the soil first, turn it over, smooth it, make sure it's nice and moist, and then cover it and seal it with plastic. Generally clear plastic. Some debate whether black or clear, but generally clear is accepted as the best way to do it. And then you leave it, preferably in a warmer time of the year when there's lots of sun, and you leave it generally for a few months. What that does is it kills a lot of the bad microorganisms in the soil, releases nutrients, and after solarization, you'll often find that your soil is much more productive. Let's also talk a little bit about no-till in relation to your soil. Now, this really applies probably mostly to vegetable gardeners or people who are doing flowers for cut flowers. But basically, if you think about the thousands and thousands of years over which soil evolves with successive layers of organic matter, you know, there's no farmer there, there's no home gardener there digging it up, tilling it, and the soil does just fine. In fact, it does great. So a newer concept that particularly a lot of organic farmers and vegetable gardeners are using is the idea that we don't do a lot of disturbing of the soil. We just add layers of compost, layers of mulch, put in our plants and let them grow and let the soil develop more naturally. One thing we need to think about in improving our soils is patience. Mother Nature has taken tens of thousands of years to develop the soil. And the first year you put in your garden, it's not going to be quite as good as it is 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road if you keep working to improve your soil. The single best thing that most of us can do for our soil is to incorporate year after year after year more and more organic matter into the soil. And generally that means compost and patience. Hey, thank you all for watching. There's a lot more information in the description box below.